A single nuclear weapon used against a city today would probably result in millions of deaths.
Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds.
It is a harnessing of the basic power of the universe.
Every thinking person fears nuclear war, and every technological nation plans for it.
The risk today is as high as it's ever been, higher even than it was during the Cold War. And we can't just assume that because they haven't been used in 80 years that they'll never be used again.
Future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier.
How many countries have nuclear weapons at the moment, and do we know how many they actually have?
Yeah, there are 9 countries, and we estimate that they have together about 12,000 nuclear weapons. Most of them are in the arsenals of just 2 countries, the United States and Russia. They have about 90% between them. And the others that have them are the UK, China, France, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. There are also several countries that host nuclear weapons on their territories. So there are 5 European countries that host US nuclear weapons, and Belarus hosts Russian nuclear weapons. So 15 countries in total that have nuclear weapons on their territories.
Of the 9 nuclear-armed states, how much money are they spending each year on their nukes? Do we know?
We've estimated it at around 100 billion US dollars, so 150 billion Australian dollars. About half of that is being spent by the US. Most of the countries that have nuclear weapons are increasing the size of their arsenals, building new warheads, but all of them are certainly enhancing the weapons and the delivery systems, the missiles and the submarines and so on. So huge money that's being made in many cases by private contractors. It's big business.
That is a staggering amount of money. We all know that nuclear weapons can cause widespread devastation, as of course we saw in Japan in the 1940s. But are you able to paint kind of a modern picture of just how much damage a singular nuclear weapon can actually do? Yeah,
well, the weapons that were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were very small compared with most of the nuclear weapons in the world today. They had yields equivalent of 15 to 20 kilotons of TNT. Most weapons today are hundreds of kilotons of TNT equivalent. So a single nuclear weapon used against a city today, depending on the size of the weapon and the size of the city, would probably result in millions of deaths. Basically, everyone close to the hypercenter would be incinerated instantly. Those further away from the hypercenter would suffer severe burn injuries, blast injuries, and receive such a high dose of radiation, ionizing radiation from the nuclear weapon, that they would die within a matter of hours, days, or weeks. And those further away may survive, but still suffer from severe injuries, psychological trauma, and they may have received a dose of radiation that results in disease later in life. So huge catastrophic consequences from even a single nuclear weapon being used. If many nuclear weapons were used, there would also be consequences for the climate. It would reduce global sunlight, global rainfall, and agricultural production, resulting in famine. That's the effect known as nuclear winter. So it's in everyone's interests that these weapons never be used again and be totally eliminated.
North Korea launched another intercontinental ballistic missile.
People were told to take cover in basements or in concrete buildings.
Could this kind of missile now reach cities on the East Coast, possibly New York or DC?
It feels like the world is in a pretty precarious position at the moment. We've got the war between Russia and Ukraine. There's fighting, of course, still going on in Gaza. There are concerns that China plans to invade Taiwan. In your opinion, just how close are we to actually getting into a nuclear war?
The risk is much higher than many people assume, and most experts agree that the risk today is as high as it's ever been, higher even than it was during the Cold War. There are more countries now with nuclear weapons, and so more plausible scenarios for the use of nuclear weapons. And even if they're not actually used, they can be used to intimidate and coerce, as we've seen, for example, with Russia's behavior towards Ukraine. And I think that this is a risk that every country in the world needs to work together to address. And we can't just assume that because they haven't been used in 80 years that they'll never be used again. That's a very dangerous assumption.
Let's talk about how we're going to get rid of nukes then. So in 2017, the United Nations adopted the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Here's a report from Al Jazeera at the time.
Conference organizers hoped for consensus amongst the countries discussing the treaty, but it took a vote to approve it. 122 states in favor, only one, the Netherlands, against. Once 50 countries ratify the Nuclear Prohibition Treaty, atomic weapons will effectively be illegal under international law. But there's a problem. The world's 9 nuclear-armed states did not take part in the talks at all. 3 of them, the US, Britain, and France, have said in a statement that they will never join the treaty. Speaking in March, Britain's UN ambassador said a nuclear-free world was worthy, but this was not the right approach.
The British government firmly believes that the best way to achieve the goal of global nuclear disarmament is through gradual, multilateral disarmament negotiated using a step-by-step approach and within existing international frameworks.
So that treaty, Tim, made it illegal to develop and test nuclear weapons, to threaten to use them, and of course to actually use them. 94 countries have signed that treaty now, 73 have ratified it, but the 9 nuclear-armed states still haven't changed their positions. So does that make this treaty a little bit redundant?
This treaty was a major breakthrough. Very little had been achieved in more than 2 decades at the United Nations on nuclear disarmament, so we shouldn't dismiss it in any way. I think that international norms matter. It matters that the majority of the world's countries have taken a stand and said that these weapons are unacceptable and have declared these weapons illegal under all circumstances. It's no surprise that the nuclear-armed states haven't joined this treaty, because the treaty says that they need to get rid of their nuclear weapons, and they're not willing to do that at the moment. But I hope that as more countries join this treaty, the pressure on the nuclear-armed states to conform to this new international norm will increase. And really, this is all that we have to put pressure on nuclear-armed states. We can't force them to disarm. Ultimately, what we have at our disposal is international law and multilateral institutions, and we need to ensure that they're strong and effective, and that the views of the majority of nations are heard.
Imagine a room awash in gasoline, and there are 2 implacable enemies in that room. One of them has 9,000 matches. The other has 7,000 matches. Each of them is concerned about who's ahead, who's stronger.
I mean, how's it going to happen, though? The US will say, well, we're not going to give them up unless Russia are going to give them up, and you can't see Russia ever going to give them up. So, what is the plan of attack here?
Well, substantial progress has been made in that at the height of the Cold War, there were around 70,000 nuclear weapons. There are around 12,000 today. So huge reductions. Not that that means that we're in a much better position today, because the risks are still extremely high. But it shows that disarmament can be done, and those reductions were achieved because the United States and the Soviet Union, and subsequently Russia, viewed it to be in their self-interests to reduce their stockpiles. I think it's in every country's interest to reduce the number of nuclear weapons and ultimately eliminate them. In fact, President Trump has referred to the need to achieve global denuclearization. Not that he's taken any steps towards that end, but it's an objective that basically every country in the world has articulated, but their actions aren't currently reflecting that ambition. So we need to really put disarmament out there as an idea that needs to be pursued.
You and your friends at the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons are doing a fantastic job. What optimism do you have? What hope do you have that a nuclear-free world is possible in our lifetime?
Well, the vast majority of countries don't have nuclear weapons. They want to see them totally eliminated. And even in the countries that possess nuclear weapons, opinion polls show that there's majority public support for eliminating them. So I think that ultimately the will of the people will prevail, and there are cases of countries that have disarmed, and these are countries that are now leading the way with the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We had a meeting this year in New York that was hosted by Kazakhstan, a country that inherited more than 1,000 nuclear weapons upon the collapse of the Soviet Union and subsequently got rid of them all. And next year, a similar meeting is being hosted by South Africa, a country that once possessed nuclear weapons and decided that in order to join the international mainstream, it needed not only to end the system of apartheid, it also needed to get rid of its nuclear weapons. So I think we could see similar fundamental shifts in the attitudes of countries that currently possess these weapons.
A new consciousness is developing which sees the Earth as a single organism and recognizes that an organism at war with itself is doomed. We are one planet.